Imagine going to war, not from a battlefield of sand and rock, but from a climate-controlled room in the American heartland. Imagine holding the power of life and death through a joystick and a high-definition screen, watching events unfold from thousands of miles away with perfect clarity. You are physically safe, but psychologically, you are right there in the kill box. When your 12-hour shift ends, you don't decompress with your unit in a forward operating base. You get in your car, drive 15 minutes through suburban traffic, and sit down for dinner with your family. How does a warrior reconcile these two realities? What is the unseen toll of this new form of combat, this remote warfare? This is the critical conversation we're having today on Voice for Valor. The men and women who serve as pilots and sensor operators for platforms like the MQ-9 Reaper are on the front lines of modern conflict, yet their battle is largely misunderstood, and their psychological wounds often go unaddressed. They experience the trauma of combat, but without the physical scars or geographic separation that society has come to associate with war. Today, we're privileged to be joined by someone who lived this reality day in and day out, Tanner Yackley. Tanner is a former MQ-9 Reaper sensor operator for the United States Air Force. He's not just here to share war stories, he's here to shed light on the profound mental health challenges, the moral injury, and the nervous system dysregulation that can result from this unique duty. Tanner will walk us through what it's really like to operate a Reaper, the moment he realized his own mental health was in crisis, and how that personal struggle led him on a mission to bridge the immense gap between operational experience and academic research. He's now a powerful advocate, spearheading innovative initiatives to create specialized mental health support for the drone community and fighting to overhaul a system that wasn't built for this type of warrior. This is a discussion about breaking down stigmas, challenging misconceptions, and demanding systemic change. It's a raw, honest, and ultimately hopeful look at the future of veteran care. You don't want to miss this. Tanner, welcome to Voice for Valor. And then we will go from there. Have you, I saw on LinkedIn that you were friends with Josh White. Have you done a podcast with Josh yet?
No, not yet. I think that was one of those where I'm just trying to make the connections and, roll with theirs. So no, not yet. But
yeah, he's a good dude.
yeah,
He interviewed me a few weeks ago. He's way better than I am. He's just so dynamic and a smooth talker, and he's got
sure.
nice fancy hair. I'm just a average Joe. Every time I see him, I'm like, dude, I'm so jealous. Look at that fancy hair you've got. So,
Well,
but
I
yeah,
think yours is bringing a solid voice to it too. So man, don't sell yourself short.
but he's a good dude. So after this, if you need an introduction about, putting your voice out there,
That'd be
I'm happy.
huge.
I'm happy to help. So,
Absolutely. And
okay.
I can either mention this or not. Completely up to you. I want to be
Yeah,
respectful
yeah.
to your
No.
podcast and things like that. But I'm actually starting. I didn't sleep last night because I had an epiphany. And I'm starting a consulting business
Okay.
for remote warfares. But it's going to be a lot more than just like veteran advocacy. I want to get into the VA with it. I've created an entire training program that's going to flip mental health training on its head, and be something that's never been seen before and never been done before. But because of the complexities of what we're dealing with, and everything with flying remotely and the challenges and stuff like that, it needs this layered approach. And right now it's just kind of getting stuff chucked at the wall, if you will, every time somebody goes in for it. So it's kind of a combination of modalities, if you will, between them. And so, yeah, the consulting business is going to help that. And I'm also going to try to go around and advocate for drone bases, things like that, commanders. I'm working, I've already got potential speaking engagement in the fall before it for Ellsworth Air Force Base, which is one of the big drone ones.
Okay.
So, Yeah, like I said, completely add or take out or whatever there
Yeah,
with it.
no,
So
no problem. And you can share any material that we discuss. I have absolutely no issues with it because this
sure.
is all about, grassroots growth. But making sure I pronounce your last name correctly, Yackley.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started, and
Sure.
you'll have a few opportunities to talk about your consulting ideas,
Sure.
and then I've got like 10 or 12 questions, but of course, by no means do we have to go through all of them. We can
Sure.
just see where things take us.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. All right. Well, welcome Tanner Yackley to the show today, Voice for Valor. I'm Mike Morris, the host, and I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. I had to ask you, since I'm so new to this. I mean, I literally started in March. How did you even find me? How did you reach out to me for a podcast interview?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty dang resourceful when it comes to looking up things, and I'm not gonna lie, ChatGPT is a lifesaver for it. So went in there and said, give me the military podcast, give me some hard hitters. I want to be able to bring, my voice to uh, everyone with it, and obviously the military podcasts, definitely hit that mark. So it was one of those, it's just a bunch of deep diving and digging around and trying to figure out who's doing what out there with
Oh
it. And
man, that's awesome. That's cool to hear that Chat GPT knows who I am.
yes, yes,
That's a step in the right direction.
yeah,
Well, I mean, man, we had a chance to talk a couple days ago, and I was fascinated by your story and the fact that we have such similar backgrounds when it comes
hmm,
to to the drone community.
yeah,
So the first question off the top rope that I wanted to ask you was, your background as an MQ-9 Reaper sensor operator, it's
hmm,
quite different from traditional combat roles. So
yes,
what initially drew you to this specialized path in the Air
yeah,
Force?
absolutely. So I joined the Air Force in September of 2010. With it, my dad was prior Air Force, so when I got to the end of high school, my mom looked at me and said, "Well, you either join the military or go to college." And I was like, "I don't want to go to school." Back then I had no intent of doing that, so I was like, "Well, I'm going to the military." And uh, worked with my recruiter, found the job, and nobody had a clue what it was. Especially back then, it was the MQ-9 was 2 years into the fight at that point, and it was that was brand new for military tech and everything else. So there was just not really a lot of information on it. And it was just like, hey, you're going to be watching stuff and providing Overwatch. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool. So I didn't even really know what it all entailed when I was going into it.
So before we get too far into the military acronym soup, can you describe to our listeners what an MQ-9 Reaper actually is?
Absolutely. So most of the time when people hear drones or anything like that, UAVs, RPAs, there's a million different acronyms now, I think, that have come up in the last 15 years, especially. But the MQ-9 Reaper is a aircraft that's got a 66-foot wingspan. It's 20 something feet in length for it, for the standard configuration. And so it's not a small aircraft by any means. It's going to be, slightly bigger than a Cessna, that kind of stuff with it. So, you're looking at a kind of normal sized aircraft. I think everyone that sees one for the first time in a hangar, if they ever get to do that opportunity, is a little shocked by the size of it there. So, it's one of the ones that was primarily used in the global war on terror. It's got a lot of different repurposes now, that the Marines are looking at and things like that with it. But yeah, it's a fully operational aircraft. It takes a two-man crew to operate, one pilot, one sensor. And as you mentioned before, I was a sensor operator. And so pilot, we always called the bus driver, with it and making sure that, they're getting you where you need to go. And our job was to, look at things on the ground and then guide in weapons and things like that too. So yeah, it's got a lot more into it than people think.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize how technical the Air Force is. So I imagine that you were a pretty good student in high school because to be a sensor operator, you're definitely on the top echelon of the scores needed to get into these types of classes or to get into these types of programs. So what was your specialty in high school? What even drove you to this Air Force technical institute, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. That's the funny thing. I was a terrible student in high school. I was so bad. I was unmotivated. I was a typical 16-year-old punk kid, running around, getting in trouble and everything else. And, I think that's why it was like, all right, pick one or the other and get the heck out of here. And it was just like, all right, I'm going to do this. And to be honest, I struggled a lot in the training. I did, like you said, it was extensive. It was hard. I failed a lot of events early with it. I had a lot of doubters that would look at me and be like, I mean, I got told straight up that you're never going to make it in this career field. You're never going to be a sensor. You're not good enough to do this job. And that just lit something in me at that point to go, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. And it just drove me through, especially my combat time, was just trying to push myself and realize that I had a little bit of pressure and a little bit of motivation. There was a lot that I could accomplish. And, I realized that going through training, getting things like the Top Gun Award and stuff like that with it, and realizing that, yeah, I might have, some floundering around and things like that here and there and fail an event every once in a while. But at the end of the day, I kind of got a knack for this thing. So it was just kind of drove me and drove my my willingness to continue and push myself.
So you mentioned the Top Gun Award. I imagine that means something like you were the best sensor operator in your class at the time. Is that what that is?
Yeah, there was like some type of award for we had like competitions on who could hit the target the most kind of thing, and as you know, there's grading criteria and stuff like that comes into it, and it's super specific and very precise. And yeah, so I think I hit like, it was like top 10% of the class for that. And again, it was just kind of me at the time, just kind of fumbling through it going, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. That felt good.
Yeah.
Getting recognition.
That is pretty cool. I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile. That should be on there. Top Gun.
Yes,
That's pretty
absolutely.
sweet. You mentioned combat missions, and you've flown over 1,000 combat
That's
missions.
correct.
Can you walk us through what a typical mission looked like? Obviously, in the unclassified world, but
Sure.
how that experience differed from what most people might imagine about military service? A day in your shoes in this mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I was stationed in Las Vegas at the time. So we would wake up and, we were doing shift work to start off, and it wasn't like, oh, you get a year of shift work. No, we did 4 years of shift work straight. So to say I was tired at the end of it was an understatement, to start off. But yeah, as far as the mission goes itself, we'd go in, and honestly, 95% of the time, 99% of the time, it was the most boring, dry, nothing going on. I'm staring at some dude sleep on a roof, or, sleeping on a roof, or, just watching a kid play with goats. It doesn't matter what it is. Waiting, for somebody to come in or something like that. And so there's a lot of times where it was boring, monotonous work with it. And you're just sitting there, staring at the screen, knowing at any time there could be a call over the radio that we need a weapon on there in the next minute. And so that always sat in the back of your mind, continually with it. And, there were some days where we would sit there and nothing would go on. And there's days where we would sit there for 8 hours in a strike posture, 8 hours of a finger on a trigger, waiting for the words, and just ready to pull that trigger at a moment's notice. And there's many times where it just didn't happen. And, and it would roll to the next shift, and then that next shift would go in and take the weapons employment or something like that. So, these types of things really play into a large topic that we're going to talk about today, being the mental health toll of these operators, because it was just, you had threw shift work in there. And I was, I think we talked about this a couple days ago. It was a melting pot of bad decisions across the board with how we were handled, how we were looked at, being expendable, that it was just, you just go sit in the box and you're good. And people don't realize the amount of mental gymnastics that you'd have to go through, every single day. And you never knew if you were walking into that GCS and, they were ready to go, with a bad guy into the crosshairs, or if you were walking in and just watching a top of a building because everybody's sleeping inside for your entire shift. So it was definitely a unique experience.
Another unique experience about that location in Las Vegas where you were at in 2010, I was there the same time you were, and I try to explain to people, it's so compartmentalized.
Hmm.
I never ran into you.
Hmm.
I had friends that I went to pilot training with, never ran into them. The only time you ever ran into somebody was in the chow hall
Hmm.
if they were on a different mission or different squadron. And even then you're not talking about what you're doing. So it's a very isolating job. I mean,
Absolutely.
if it wasn't for whoever was in your flight or whoever's in your squadron, that base is a ghost town.
Oh,
There's just
absolutely.
yeah, there's no camaraderie outside of your squadron because you're read in or signed on to particular classified missions, and you don't share that stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big, I would say, issue with it and stemming from it, and that's some of the things that, I've ran surveys in this area. And that's a big, like red flag for it. Is people don't feel comfortable even now talking about it. I mean, all the stigma still exists, and some of these guys and gals have been doing this for 20 plus years now. With it, we're getting long enough down the pipe here that you got guys that have been sitting in this, state of mind for a long time. And so, to really add on to that conditioning and that compartmentalization, with, exactly like you said, heck, there was, we had two other teams, to cover the three shifts, being a day shift, a swing shift, and a mid shift. We had two other teams, and besides the change out of the two people that would walk into my ground control station, you didn't see anybody else. So,
yes.
even in your own squadron, I could go months without seeing an individual in the squadron if they were just happen to line up, just far enough off with whatever their weekend was, whatever my weekend was, because, oh, by the way, you didn't work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You work shift work 365 days a year. And on top of it, you rotated shifts. And, I don't know about you, but for me, we run an 8-day rotation. So we were on 5 days on, 3 days off. And that first day was like a potential on the hook to get called into work,
Hmm.
which doesn't seem like that big a deal. But again, just a tiny little, piece of icing on top. Where on that first day off, when you're trying to decompress and you're trying to just relax and whatever, or God forbid, you're trying to switch shifts, um, you know that there's the smallest 1% chance that your phone rings and you got to throw that bag on, that flight suit, and haul up there. And that happens a couple of times. So again, you talk about, all these ways that the operations were conducted and the personnel were, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Structured around there, and the schedules and things like that. It was just, like I said, a melting pot of bad decisions.
It was rough. I specifically remember trying to transition from night shift back to day shift. That was so difficult because,
Absolutely.
my squadron, I think we did 4 weeks on a particular shift before we switched over to that next rotation. Now you're at 28 days ish of being
Hmm.
on a particular schedule and then switching to that day shift when you're supposed to be sharp because this is a
Hmm.
very, very important mission. It was tough. It was tough.
Absolutely.
So you really spent those 3 days off after your night shift just psychologically preparing yourself to get ready for that day shift.
Yeah, absolutely. The transitions were the worst because, it was either you tried to fall asleep right away for a couple hours and then wake up, and then just push your body, for 12 hours after that or something like that. Or what I would do and a lot of other people would do, was just stay up.
Yeah.
And so then you're staying up 24, 26, 28 hours, getting that full transition, just knocking out. And then the next 2 days, you're pretty much sleep, the entire time because your body is trying to get caught up on, oh, we just switched, complete shifts completely.
Yeah. At what point did you begin noticing these psychological impacts of remote warfare on yourself and on your colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, not until I got out. I had some minor things. I like they semi-diagnosed me with sleep apnea, or not sleep apnea, but insomnia at one point because I just wasn't sleeping, which is insane with the work that we did. There was plenty of times where I would go into work on 2 hours of sleep and sit there 6, 7, 8 hours in the box. I'm gonna do that a handful of days, and eventually my body would just crash out, and then it was just there's a roll of the dice of when you woke up. At that point, because there wasn't an alarm in the world that would wake me up for some of that when you just hit that wall. But yeah, absolutely. It wasn't until I had family when I first got out, and they were like, "Man, you seem really irritable," and that kind of thing. And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm just a hard charger," because that's what the military told me the whole time. And it's like, and then I realized, like, step back, and I'm like, maybe something isn't going on here. But like I said, there's so many stigmas and so many barriers to try to get through that it made it really difficult to recognize truly when that flip switched, and or switch flipped, and I really started recognizing that.
When I was in the Pentagon, my first job was in policy, and I happened to be cubicle mates, if you will, with an F-15 pilot, and we started talking about the drone mission versus the man cockpit mission, and he said there's just not as many guys struggling with PTSD in the F-15 community. And so when we, bounced some ideas off one another, we kind of came to the conclusion that the F-15 is dropping bombs on target, and then they're turning out of the weapon engagement zone, and
Hmm.
they're flying back to safety. Whereas the sensor operator and the drone pilot are sitting there for hours after the strike, and
Hmm.
you're seeing this pattern of life that the typical man cockpit is not sitting around watching. And so he said that he was surprised but supportive of what was going on in the drone community, because it's like, oh, you're just staring at a TV screen all day.
Hmm.
What's the big deal?
Yeah,
So from a traditional PTSD framework, it doesn't fully capture the experience of drone operators. Could you explain
absolutely.
could you explain how those mental health challenges you observed differ from conventional combat trauma?
Absolutely. Well, the number one thing, right? So when you look into this, and I dove into this a couple of years ago when I was going through the VA system, and I just started getting so sick of hitting all these walls. And they're sitting there, and I had a terrible experience my first time, unfortunately. I had an intern that did my initial diagnosis. Nobody in that building even knew what a drone was. So it was just very difficult to get through that process. But one of the biggest issues that's stemming from your question with that is because the Diagnostical Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders that the VA and other agencies utilize to identify, if someone has post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or any or those types of things. Um, that one specifically, it doesn't cover all the bases. It's only really captures like probably 30% of the mental health issues that drone operators face. And so that's where like I'm working right now, and I've got it tested, and I've got a meeting with one of the VA directors tomorrow. Um, and I'm presenting this tool there. It's called the Recon tool, and it's a tool to be able to essentially take in and diagnose drone operators effectively, and taking into account all the different areas. And because for me, I've spent the last 7 years studying this area. I got so sick of just nobody having an answer, nobody knowing what to do, just feeling like more of that, outcast in the community. And even worse when you get out, because then you lose that camaraderie, you lose that, all those things. And so I was scrambling, and like a lot of people now, was struggling a lot.
The um Fortunately for me, the VA has been very supportive. And I just wanted to remind our listeners that even though we are talking about, some dark topics, I still look back at that experience is something that I would never trade. It developed a human element in me that made me understand the enemy from a completely different perspective. I developed a level of empathy, even though I felt that what we were doing was just and lawful. It was still painful, but I would never trade that for anything.
Hmm.
I'm thankful that I had that opportunity, and so I don't want to scare people away from service or flying in the unmanned community because of some of these things we're talking about.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I share the same sentiment. I am very grateful for what I did. It made me who I am today. It made me, launch the initiatives that I'm trying to push and be this change agent for, across the country for, squadron commanders, for the VA. It doesn't matter, just education in any way. Because what we did and what you touched on there was, the moral piece of it. And that's really the piece that's missing, especially when we tie it back to that um, the PCL5, which is the PTSD checklist that they utilize when diagnosing. And, the biggest thing that misses is that moral injury piece. And that moral injury piece is exactly what you're talking about, right? I'm going in and I'm watching this individual go get groceries, hug his wife, play with his kids, come home at this time every day, go to sleep at this time. I'm getting this almost intimate view, uh, of these operations and these people, and I'm learning more than like we talked about that F-15 pilot that just comes in, drops a bomb, and leaves. I'm learning all the build up ahead of it. So you drive this emotional attachment to who you're watching, and a tiny, tiny part of you gets fragmented away from that when all of a sudden that person disappears, i.e., there's a weapon strike. So, it's this really interesting dynamic with that. And that area, especially, is one that I'm definitely doing more research into because I can tell you right now that no one is talking about across the board, and it's one area that definitely needs to get brought up and addressed. And if someone should hear drone operator, they should tie in moral injury immediately with that. Almost even more so than PTSD, which is also, I would argue, is equally up there.
You mentioned initiatives, and I know that you're working the Drone Veteran Healing Initiative.
Hmm.
And what did and excuse me, but it addresses several layers of healing, if I understand you correctly.
That's correct.
Could you break down what nervous system dysregulation and cognitive executive breakdown look like specifically
Absolutely.
for drone veterans? Those are some 50-cent words that I don't understand.
Yes, yes. So the first part is what this does to our nervous system with this. And really, when you're sitting there in that sustained combat operation, because that's, you're really on the hook the whole time. And so you're sitting there and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. And so what is your brain doing? It's constantly evaluating what's going on around you. I know a few people that I've talked to and interviewed and things like that and talked to in passing. And I've kind of put a spin on this as I call it ping pong brain. You get these thoughts that are bouncing all around, and you can't keep your mind straight and things like that. And some people experience it, some people don't. I'm definitely one of them that does. And so it just feels like your brain's on fire with it, and so that ties into a little bit of that nervous system issues there. That, and you can get another one with that is there's a direct link, and this is another study area I'm doing with what's called the vagus nerve. And I can never remember the acronym for um, there's a treatment for it. The acronym's Sierra Golf Bravo, and it's like stellium ganglion block, something to the effect. I'm sure I just butchered the heck out of there, so no doctors come after me. But it was one of those things where that's got to do with the vagus nerve, and that runs through your chest. And for me, for my nervous system, mine can be so out of whack some days that I feel like there's like a stake driven into my chest. Or the other way that I describe it to doctors and things like that is like someone was just grabbing at my chest and trying to tear my rib cage apart. I mean, it can be that extreme and that extensive. And the first time that happened, holy crap, I thought I was dying.
Yeah, I
You
was
know,
gonna
I'm
say, did you think you're having a heart attack?
Yeah, I ended up in the ER because I panicked. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't understand this. Kind of thing. And so it was one of those that, and now, whenever that happens, I put a cold pack on my chest. I've got them under in the bathroom under the sink, and I walk over, grab them, pop it, and slap it on my chest, and it kind of numbs, that really strong reaction that my body's happening. And the hard thing with it is it's trying to perceive danger, right? It gets into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Um, and with that, you're constantly in this state of it. So I can just be walking down the street, walking to a store, sitting on the couch, doesn't matter, and just wham. It'll just hit you and you're like, whoa, what the heck is that? So that, like I said, that really gets into that nervous system piece of this for it, and definitely provides some challenges and can frankly be really unsettling the first time you experience it. So, especially for anyone that might be potentially, watching this video and realizing that, hey, I might share some of these same, symptoms and things like that. I want you to know that is completely normal.
Mm.
You're not having a heart attack, obviously as long as you don't have a heart condition, but that's what you feel like. And you're like, oh my gosh, kind of thing. But really being able to put words behind that can help. And it's just because your nervous system is so out of whack.
It really seems like your work, um, the bridge between operational experience with academic research. How has your doctoral work informed your approach to developing this healing initiative?
Absolutely. One, it's just, tying in all these studies. There's a gentleman named Wayne Chappell that did a couple different studies in this area. And back in, I think it was 2014, and then again in 2019. Um, and so, but a lot of these studies looked at operations. They looked at active duty drone operators and those areas. And so when I started going through, the VA and some of these areas, and just not able to kind of find the information I was trying to look for, and just felt like I always felt like in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's got to be something more, and I kept comparing it to, the people that, you think of that when you talk about, post-traumatic stress disorder, you think of somebody that, loses their best friend that's right next to them or something like that, with it. And so I remember always having my brain go back to that and go, what do those guys do? Where are those guys at? Like, who's treating those guys? Because I was so confused on what was all going on. But that's because there just wasn't a fundamental understanding within the medical career field that there's other areas, and there's so much dysregulation between, your nervous system and other areas there, as well as that moral injury piece that aren't covered in traditional therapies.
So what resistance have you encountered so far when advocating for these specialized mental health approaches for drone veterans? It sounds like
Absolutely.
you have an interview coming, or a discussion with the VA, so it sounds like there is
Yes.
some progress made, but what kind of resistance are you getting?
Yeah. The biggest thing is, honestly, is it's the community. And it's because of two things. It's because of lack of education. People don't understand. Like you said, when you walk into a room and say, you just point to somebody and say, hey, you know what a drone is? They probably think of little dinky quadcopters, right? Buzzing around, and they've been, everywhere since 2016, when they became popular. So that in itself, when you're like, no, the big one from the movies, I feel like I always find myself saying that. That's always like my go-to
Uh,
when I'm talking to people. I'm like, no, like the big one from the movies, like, because I don't know how else to describe it to people, and to get them to click right there
yeah.
with it. So that, like I said, the lack of education, within the medical field from the public, that type of thing, and then how much we compartmentalized back in the day has made these heavy, heavy stigmas within our own community of not talking, not bringing things up, being scared, thinking that uh, if I go to the VA and get a PTSD rating, that's going to turn around and affect my FA class 2 medical, class 1 medical. It just depends on, that thought process there. But that one's a huge one because, as you know, but our listeners might not, a large part of this is, hey, what do you do when you get out? You trade a flight suit for a polo and go and do it as a contractor because you gained a bunch of skills and you were, working your tail off every day. So that's pretty much the only thing and you're comfortable with it. So, but a lot of people have fear of repercussions there with it, and so that's where other initiatives like the Pilot Mental Health Campaign are great objectives for that, and really trying to break down those barriers and those stigmas. But that's absolutely a section where, I always say, we eat our own when it comes to that, because especially I remember guys that would go up and they'd cry uncle, especially 2012, 2013, and we all laughed, and then, we were like, what? No, because everything we were told is you're not real Ericer. You're a glorified stewardess. You're the redheaded stepchild of this career field. You're playing a video game. What you're doing isn't real. And, and you're not there, so you can't have trauma. You never left the country. You never deployed, so you can't have trauma. And that one I hear a ton, that last one. And even now, unfortunately, within, different healthcare systems and things like that, there's still providers out there that believe that. And that's, again, where the PCL5 falls short, is it's designed for, that deployment, boots on the ground. And arguably, what I think that thing came out in the 70s. We're a little past that. And it's been revised and things like that, but not to the level that it needs to be. And so that's where, I'm really pushing the recon initiative to be able to change the way and have a specific intake form for mental health and drone operators, because the current system is not even close to supporting it correctly. And so many people are just, you think about all those things that I just said, and they're nice things. To sit there, and especially for your mental and your psyche, to sit there and hear those things all the time. And then you get out and you're invalidated even more because people don't understand and they're not educated. And so I'm working on breaking those barriers down. And that's the whole reason why I am starting in remote warrior consulting, because I want to, be able to go to these units, provide educational materials, provide, what the signs to look for, the stigmas, all these things, and just shatter them all. Because I can't listen to another call of a best friend or a close buddy that calls me and is just bawling. They're going, I don't understand what's going on in right. Man, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's scary as heck, but I got you. Because there's so many few people that truly understand. And then you're within the system that is just knocking you down left and right, with it, with the training, with everything. Everything is just this insane, full throttle all the way with it. So because of that is really what's driving the need for this change.
I regret in my own time some of those traits that you mentioned. I remember if somebody was reaching out for help, we're like, oh, well, now the rest of the line has to take up the slack because we're down a pilot or we're down a sensor operator. And in one campaign, we had a new guy, and he came from the C-17 community like myself. I came from C-17s, and he was literally one of his first couple missions. He had a strike, and he got out of the seat and he's like, I can't do this. And so he became a conscientious dissenter. Is that the term?
Yeah, conscientious observer, I think.
Okay, yeah,
Or objector. That's what it is.
Objector. Thank you. He became a conscientious objector.
Yeah,
and he was a captain at the time who was a flight commander. So you're like, wait a second, man, you're in charge of like 20 people, and you're not going to do the mission. And of course, looking back now, obviously a lack of empathy and understanding from from my point of view.
Hmm.
And so I feel bad for thinking that way. But it was like, yeah, now everybody else has to just fly the line that much more because we're down a pilot or a sensor operator. Uh,
Absolutely.
and then when I was struggling after a couple events, I went to talk to the behavioral health guy, and nice guy. It's nothing personal, and it's not a personal attack on him, but
Hmm.
he was saying things like, "Oh, when you wake up in the morning, just tell yourself, I'm gonna have a good day." And I was like, "Brother, if you think that's the solution
Hmm.
to what's going on between, my two ears,
Hmm.
dude, that is not it.
Absolutely.
That is not it." So thankfully, you and some others out there that are speaking out on behalf of everybody, thank you for doing that, because
Absolutely.
our behavioral health professionals, they need a different toolbox to
Hmm.
to be addressing these situations.
No,
So
absolutely. The stigma is absolutely there, and the education is so needed. Because I've even seen, unfortunately, I've gotten comments, recently from active drone, leadership, and they're like, "Well, everybody's just using it as an excuse to get out." And it's like, what? It's like even after all this time, we're still hitting barriers, and these people are getting affected, and then with it, so it's not just a hey, we need this checklist or we need this one healthcare. So I'm tackling this from every angle and going, this needs a systemic overhaul. And this needs every piece of this to get restructured because the system is failing us completely. I mean, I've lost count of how many people that I've lost to suicide because they can't face the demons anymore and they don't understand and nobody does. And they reach out. And I think of the people like me who obviously have a very type A personality. But man, if you're not, that dude's not even opening, touching the handle on the door, let alone walking in. And
yeah.
so you're going to have them turn around and try to advocate for themselves? Heck no. So it's for guys like that is why I started doing this years ago. And like I said, it just kind of hit me with it and with working on the study and everything else and going, I need to do truly more with this. And I'm in a position and being in the community for 15 years and being on the research side, being on the operational side, with it and going, I think I can change a couple things here and make this better for everyone because it's just such a disservice that, this special group of extremely talented veterans are, getting looked at like a leper, with it and or just, you're just doing a video game. You can't have problems.
I know you're going through your doctorate program, so you're not complete yet. You're not Dr. Yackley, but do you have any success stories that you can share with us from implementing your current multi-layered healing model as you're going
Hmm.
through your program?
Yeah. Right now, as far as the actual model itself goes, that's what my hopeful meeting tomorrow is about, to try to get the implementation of that. But the biggest thing with this is, again, this is a multi-layered approach. So it's not, and especially if you're getting treated by, the VA or any doctor, and if they come in and go, all right, well, we're gonna try this one thing, that's where you gotta halt that conversation and go, hold on, this is going to take multiple different approaches because it's not just that you experience trauma. You experience trauma, you experience dysregulation, you experience, you know, a dysregulated nervous system, moral injury, memory, cognitive, decline. So there's so many different things and ways that this can manifest itself. And that's the biggest thing with this is we went through such a dynamic environment that people don't understand all of it's tied together. And it could be simple things. I remember one of the things that my fiance told me when we first met. We were sitting I think we were out to eat, and I was sitting at the table, and I had my hands, I had the edges of my forearms on the table, and I was sitting there like this. And she's kind of looking at me, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Sitting here eating. She's like, "Why do you have your hands up like that?" I'm like, "I don't know." And we sat there and talked about it. And I realized, well, that's because that's where the zoom lever and the joystick was. and my hands would naturally fall and rest on the edge of the console. So now when I sat down to have dinner, my hands naturally hit the same spot on the table. And it's like, so it's like little epiphanies like that for the last 7 years, and talking with people and interviewing people, and being able to, people get blown away when I have a conversation with them, and I'm like, let me guess what's going on in your head before even saying anything to them. And I bet you I can hit about 75% of it. Because that's the strange thing with this, and this is again why I have such strong advocacy for this endeavor, is everybody is almost manifesting Polaroid picture the exact same way. And it's this multifaceted, symptom, with it, and it's all this weird ball of wire that's all tied together. So, it's really again about bringing more to then, hey, we just need one therapy. We need a complete overhaul across the board.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. If there was one thing that you wish the general public understood about drone warfare, because this is the technology that is progressing,
Mhm.
what do you want the general public to understand about what's
Yeah,
going on?
absolutely. One that, these people went through so much, but also are so capable. So one, I mean, from like an employer side, man, if you're lucky enough to get a drone guy as in your group, you've hit a gold. You've hit somebody that can handle extreme pressure. You've hit someone that can multitask, that can operate different sensors, that can, and that can facilitate into things like IT, program management, project management, other areas like that for it. And so because of that, there's so many things that these people can bring to the table, but unfortunately, a lot of it gets looked at as, oh, well, you're the one calling mental health. I've got a service dog that I walk around with all day. You should see the look I get at, 33, and I got a service dog, and people are like, "Are you training him?" And I'm like, "Nope, he's mine." I think it's the most common question I get.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, because so many people in the civilian community, they just think, "Oh, well, you must be broken." And it's like,
Yeah,
"No, you're not broken. These are amazingly capable folks
absolutely.
that can multitask and do so many things,
Hmm.
that just because they're going through this one struggle in their life does not mean that they're not a wonderful hire that's going to be doing great things for your company."
Absolutely. And
S-
the only other thing I'll say on that real quick too is the other thing that they bring to the table is you don't have to micromanage them. You can let them, and don't, because you're gonna one, you're gonna, you're gonna torque them off a little bit, because they're gonna be like, dude, get out my chili,
Yeah.
kind of thing, and like, let me do my job. So it's one of those that, but they'll perform beautifully for you. You give them a lane to work in, and it can be as wide as, a 6-lane highway. But if you do that and you turn around and say, all right,
What, dude?
now let's turn around and go ahead and, give me this constraint and operate here, boom, and then they can do it, kind of thing. You don't need to sit there and be on their case 24/7. You can just say, here's what I need to get done. What are your thoughts on that? And let them run, man. It's incredible, the skills and things like that we developed, with it, and to be able to do this, tactical thinking, split second decision making, life or death decisions every single day. And now it translates to just this insane, work production that you can bring to the table, and really bring unique perspectives to it.
I was flying missions in an undisclosed location, and I had this young airman sensor operator with me, like A1C senior airman. And I turned to him one day. We were on night shift. We were doing launch and recoveries, so we were showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning to grab these airplanes. And I turned to him and I said, I said, "Brother, thank you so much for being such a responsible young man. I've never once had to wake you up. I've never once had to wait around for you being late or being ill prepared for what we're
Hmm.
doing." I'm like, Here's a 21-year-old kid that's just knocking it out of the park." So
Yeah.
if somebody like that were to say, "Hey, I would like some counseling. I would like to get some of these things off my chest," it makes me so sad to think that he would be stigmatized and would be potentially a difficult hire because of him calling out for help. Because like I said, I can tell you a lot of 21-year-old kids today that can't show up at 3 o'clock in the morning day after day after day
Yes,
and be ready to go and responsible on a job. So I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, so there's a lot of great airmen out there that are deserving of opportunities. So
100%.
well, Tanner, before I leave you, I typically ask a couple, closing questions for folks. And one of them is, what would you say to that high school 18-year-old Tanner today about where his career has gone, and would you do anything different?
I wouldn't do a thing different. I can start off with that because all of my experiences, everything I've been through, the good, the bad, and real ugly, have led me to where I am and made me more resilient. And I pulled my first trigger before I was legally allowed to have a beer. I was
Yeah.
20 years old the first time I employed a weapon. And so I mean, one, you talk about responsibility, you are the tip of the spear. With something like that, you get to make an impact that unfortunately the public won't see, but man, is that such a cool feeling to know when you're successful in those roles and things like that, and life skills that you'll learn, and ability to be able to process this information. As long as you have support and are honest with yourself going through the process and saying, hey, I got an issue, I need help, kind of thing. And there's been so many programs that have been put in place at these activity bases that are a heck of a lot better than when we went through. They were non-existent back then. So there is support, and the more that we normalize this, and the more that we do exactly this, even you and I just sitting here talking about this and reminiscing about some of the stories and things like that is going to help. And I've already seen it with pushing these initiatives, and the messages that I've gotten is just amazing. To see that, what I'm doing is making a real impact, and that there's so many people out there that are struggling. Obviously, like you said earlier, it's sad, that there's this many people that are feeling that way. But at the same time, to see the conversation start shifting, and just like a fire, right? You takes one ember, kind of thing, and it can ignite. And absolutely, I think we're getting there. And the more that we talk about this, the better this is going to be. And for that kid, that 18-year-old kid that wants to make a difference, it's a fantastic career field. You are going to do some amazing things. You are going to do things bigger than yourself than you'd ever dream of, and you can take it as far as you can go, and you can walk away from that with some of the most, fulfilling and amazing qualities, especially when it comes to leadership and decision making, than many many other people at that. Even if they do 4 years at 18 and get out at 22, you're a decade ahead of anybody else at that point, with it. So don't forget that. But at the same time, biggest thing that, where my mindset has shifted for sure, is take care of yourself. Know, understand, and recognize this. And again, this is where I'm hoping that, the remote warrior consulting I would love to be able to, travel to bases, talk to base commanders, talk to squadron commanders, present findings, present real data. I've ran a survey in the last 48 hours and I got 50 respondents. That doesn't happen unless there's a systemic issue and there's people quietly crying for help. And right now, I mean, that voice is so loud. And so, it's just one of those where you want to ride that wave and be the change you want to see, and that's really what it comes down to, why I'm doing this. And across the board is, I want to be the change, because no one should have to go through this. But at the same time, we can do a lot better on the other side.
Brother, thank you so much for finding me online. And now that we're linked up on LinkedIn, I have tons of squadron commanders, wing commanders, group commanders that are in my group
Network.
or
Yeah.
network.
Yeah.
And so please take advantage of that, because they
Absolutely.
all those guys and gals, they want to help,
Yeah.
and they will be more than happy to support your initiative, because what you're doing is such a positive for the community. And I just thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Thank you so much for reaching out to me and taking the
Yes.
time to have this conversation.
100%.
So
Thank you so much, Mike, for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
absolutely, brother. Take care.
All right. Take care.